She felt that somebody had pressed thumbs into, like when you strangle someone. That's what she mostly remembers, those marks after thumbs.
This is part 2 of What Happened to Annie, a new 6-part series from Sky News StoryCast. I'm Rona Dougall. Previously in part 1, nearly 15 years after her daughter's death, Guya, Annie's mother, has just been told by undertaker Gun that she believes markings on Annie's body are evidence of murder.
Men de har sett att det är fel, kan jag känna.
Gun feels that they know that this is wrong. There is something very wrong about this.
And so to part 2 in Annie's story, the case for murder.
How will I explain to my husband that my daughter, our daughter, was heavily beaten up? You don't get big bruises out of nothing.
It's June the 26th, 2019, and the case is about to take on a new dimension.
Människan, för att hon är död. Kan ni översätta det?
In 2005, undertaker Gun was not the first person to raise concerns over Annie's body.
It was removed, it was pulled off from Annie's scalp.
Following her discovery on the beach, Annie was taken to Cross House Hospital in Kilmarnock, where she remained for 2 days before undergoing an autopsy. She was then driven to London by hearse, and 2 weeks after she was found on Prestwick Beach, Annie was flown to Sweden and taken to Danabay's funeral home.
Man tar inte bort håret heller, utan det hör till personen.
Ja, det hör och det ramlar inte av. Det såg ju att det var tovigt.
In fact, her body would lie here for over a year before finally being buried. For Guya, the critical point in this journey is when Annie was driven to London.
There were a funeral company in London that were responsible for the transportation, and they made her ready for the trip. She had to be prepared for the journey to be able to transport her to Sweden.
Because of Annie's insurance policy, she was flown to Sweden from London. But this company...
I'm just going to read a letter that was sent by Global Network's funeral assistants. It was...
Global Network's funeral assistants. When producer Robert Mulhern was recording in Sweden with Gun, Annie's mother Guya allowed Robert to read these letters.
So the letter is dated... There isn't a date on the letter, but it says, with regards to the above case, I would like to offer a full explanation for the events that took place.
But Operations Director Damien Melville was so troubled by the deep bruisings he saw, he wrote this letter to Annie's insurance company and notified the Scottish police.
During the restoration of Annie's hair in particular, he found that her hair was falling out due to washing and combing. I can verify that she did have significant bruising to her body, which for reasons I cannot explain, I believe were not included in the autopsy report. I find this to be quite unusual considering the circumstances of her death, and I recommend a contact with the hospital coroner in this respect.
At first, the police said the marks were a result of exposure and decomposition.
But these were not that kind of marks, these were bruises.
They also explained that Annie had come into contact with rocks on the seabed.
Could it be the case that the bruising was caused by Annie's body being in rough seawater and being bounced off stones or rocks?
But none of this made sense to Annie's best friend Maria. When she visited Prestwick Beach, she saw that the sand was coarse, but the waters seemed gentle and clear of any large rocks, and Annie could only have been in the sea a maximum of 15 hours.
The bruisings and the marks is not consistent with Annie walking out in the water, drowning herself, and then floating back to the shore.
Besides, Maria always thought bruising couldn't happen after death. After leaving Gun's funeral home in 2005, Annie's mother Guya and best friend Maria went in search of Annie's autopsy report. We too had questions.
Drink coffee?
I do.
I'll get you a cup of coffee there.
So in July 2019, we met with Dr. Stuart Hamilton, a forensic pathologist with the British Home Office, and asked if he could take a look at Annie's autopsy.
The way it's written, it goes through exactly as I would expect a report to be written.
He began reading the report, and everything appeared to check out.
There is no definitive finding. There is no one thing that says this person did drown. But then we have what for me is a very interesting comment. White, clear, frothy fluid is present coming from the mouth. Now that is something that points to drowning.
But what about the explanation as to how and when bruising on Annie's body came about?
Bruising is something that happens when you get blunt trauma when you're alive. That is, I think, the most concerning aspect of this whole thing. So the first explanation that could be proffered is this young woman has significant bruising. Therefore she has significant blunt trauma in life. This has been missed up to this point. That is one interpretation. That is a very, very concerning one. That means there is something going on here that's simply not been considered.
Dr. Hamilton is a highly qualified Home Office pathologist. If what he says is true, bruising could only have happened before Annie drowned.
Because somebody has drowned doesn't mean, of necessity, that the only thing that has happened is they drowned. Is it possible that she came to harm before?
To answer this question, Dr. Hamilton would need the photos of Annie's autopsy. But when we asked the Crown Office if we could see them, they wrote back to us saying it wasn't in the public interest for these photos to be released. The key question for us is why? Why don't the Crown Office see this as a matter of public interest? Nearly 12 years ago, Annie's family were also refused access. But back then, they gave her a very different answer to the same question. Doing so, they said, might jeopardise some future investigation. We're beginning to see why Annie's family have serious questions over the circumstances of her death. Is somebody somewhere trying to hide something? Guya has asked this question many times in the Swedish media. After 14 years, she would eventually grow exhausted. However, in 2014, she spoke with great clarity in a phone interview with Red Ice Productions.
Do you know how the Scottish police went about?
We're going to use some parts of that interview to help tell this story.
And how quickly did they come to their conclusions about that this was a suicide?
They told me every day for about 6 weeks that my daughter had committed a suicide. To begin with, I could say something about where she was found, and she was found about 80 kilometers away from where she lived. And she lived in Edinburgh, but was found in Prestwick, and that's the small community where the airport is situated then. And she was found in a walking distance from the airport on the beach. Annie was a strong swimmer, and this was the 4th of December. When she was found, her jacket and her bag was beside her on the beach. So that was very strange to me.
How Annie's body, along with her jacket and bag, all ended up in the exact same location seems really odd. But it's not the only odd thing. Though police had recovered Annie's wallet, Undertaker Gun found Annie's credit cards under the mattress of her transport coffin. while the clothes she'd been wearing on the beach had been sent home to the family, still wet. And where were the rest of her things?
She was wearing a red and white fleece, but that's missing. That's not been found.
For Guya, it was beginning to feel that the police had been less than meticulous at the crime scene. Our understanding is that the police did not treat this as a crime scene, because in their eyes, no crime had taken place. Within a few months of Annie's death, Guya set out on her own to find out what happened to Annie. She flew to Scotland to try and find the last person reputed to have seen Annie alive. And we're about to meet that man too.
Yes, that was the way that we came walking.
It's late July 2019 in Prestwick, and Andrew Montgomery is walking along the beach where Annie was found dead.
Sea's much further in today than it was then, and
he's done this walk hundreds of times, but when he left home on the Saturday Annie was last seen with his friend Doug Parker, he didn't know just how significant this walk would become.
And at that time of year there was a kind of mistiness on the water. We call it the gloaming in Scotland. It's at dusk. The light wasn't perfect by any means, but it must have been earlier than the sun going down, I guess.
The police maintain that as the sun was going down, around 4 p.m. that Saturday, December the 3rd, 2005, Annie was filmed on CCTV around half a mile away by the town. But on the beach, there was someone out about 100 metres by the water.
I can't even tell you what was strange about it. But it was noticeable. And we stopped and watched for a little while. Then we walked on right round to where those houses are. And then we came back. Period of time, I would say maybe 15, 20 minutes. It doesn't take very long to walk to the headland and come back again. And as we came back, lady was still there. And I'm resisting saying lady. I think it was a lady, but the state of the light and the distance away, I can't be absolutely sure.
Given Andrew couldn't say with any certainty that this was Annie or even a woman standing at the water's edge, how were the Crown Office able to say so? Especially given that the police say Andrew was the sole witness. This is an outtake from a letter written by a senior Scottish politician to the Swedish government in 2007.
A witness statement indicated someone fitting her description was seen standing at the water's edge, looking out to sea at about 16:30 hour.
Annie's mother, Guya, now believes this letter is proof the authorities were using evidence that wasn't entirely clear. Either that, or it was Andrew's friend, Doug, who'd identified Annie.
Did the police ever question Doug?
I don't know. I did call him to say that the police might do, but I can't remember ever going back to it. It seemed the whole thing just seemed to drop.
To find out for sure, we called Doug at his home in England.
Hello?
Hiya Doug, it's Rob Mulhern in Skye.
Oh, hello there.
I've been chatting to Andrew a few times and I asked him could he contact you on my behalf and...
Yeah, he rang me last night, yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I can't add anything to what Andrew's told you. I really can't. You know, we were both walking on the beach, which was late afternoon, and we saw this figure about, 100, 150 yards away. It was a bit indistinct because, of course, like I said, it was late afternoon. Visibility wasn't that good. And that's right, all we can say. But we couldn't even see whether it was a woman or what that person looked like. No.
And when you were speaking to the police, what did...
I wasn't speaking to the police. I didn't speak to the police. Does Andrew say we spoke to the police?
Well, Andrew spoke to the police. He definitely remembers, and he was called to... was it Ayr Police Station or another police station?
Yeah, I wasn't. I lived down in Lancashire, and we were just visiting, and I think we left the day after we saw this person on the beach.
Sure,
When
sure.
we, I mean, my wife and I.
But you don't recall getting any phone call from the police?
No. I definitely did not talk to any police.
The police would have known there were 2 key witnesses. Why did they interview only one? In the days after Annie's death, could one of these witnesses have sparked a memory? If they were interviewed alone or together? We'll never know. In 2007, Annie's family weren't aware of any of this, but already their relationship with the Scottish authorities had broken down.
But how many mothers and families from abroad called that urgently that I did and asked all those questions? Why was I not taken seriously? Did they want to shame? Did they not fear that they would shame themselves not taking Annie's case seriously? Or did she not matter because she was not a Scottish girl? Or was I annoying them in some way? Should a woman, a Scottish woman, would she keep silent in this situation? Was I behaving strangely? Mothers should cry at the graveyard, but they should not ask questions. Or did they make a mistake and they do not want to admit it? So that's why they keep to this story all the time. No matter what I say, no matter what we present.
However, by now, the Scottish authorities were coming under some pressure, because around this time, the Swedish Minister for Foreign Affairs and one-time Prime Minister Carl Bildt called for Annie's case to be re-examined. The response was not to reopen the case, but to invite the Swedish Crime Inspector, Hans Melander, over to Scotland.
And I'm not sure that he was allowed to sit down and have a look himself at in the investigation. I think the Scottish police read parts of the investigation, because when Hans Melander left us a copy of his visit in Scotland, it was very... It didn't cover, to us it didn't cover everything.
It may not have covered everything, but this visit supercharged the theory that Annie had been murdered. The information felt even more significant because the police in Scotland had, up until this point, kept it from the family. But why? Detective Melander has declined to talk to us. He never gave a reason, but the family say he gave them the exact location on the beach Annie was found. And this is where we need to slow the pace for just a moment. Because when you walk south along the shore in Prestwick, the beach rises slightly. You'd never notice, but what it means is the tide doesn't always reach the seawall on the raised end of the beach where Annie was discovered.
Every time we have been at the beach, we have tried to speak with people who have been willing to speak with us. And some were concerned about the fact that the tide can't transport the body to the place where Annie's body was found. So this has been something that we have wanted to receive some proof about.
They went to the site at exactly the same tide that Annie was found washed up.
This is Tom Minogue, a Scottish political activist who's taken a keen interest in Annie's case.
I coordinated that with them, and with the Met Office, at that time, the water where she was found right up against the quay wall wouldn't have floated a body there. And there's always the possibility that somebody can be murdered in a scene away from the scene where the body is found. And yes, people can be drowned in the bath and then brought and laid at the shore. That was something that Gouget and Maria considered.
According to one marine expert we've spoken to, Prestwick did experience a higher tide than usual that weekend. High enough, in theory, for Annie to have ended up by the seawall where she was found. But because it's impossible to say so definitively, the family say the theory Annie was killed and placed on the beach cannot be discounted. And there was more.
I have a document somewhere written there is a DNA on her hands from an unknown woman.
Sources close to the Scottish and Swedish police have confirmed that DNA from an unknown woman was indeed discovered on Annie's hands. Both suggested Annie might have picked up the DNA after touching something like a handrail, for instance, as opposed to some direct physical contact.
It was found somewhere on Annie's hands. We don't know exactly where.
And even though she had been in this salt water, it was still there. And we asked them to match it again, and we had quite a email conversation with the Crown Office about that, and they didn't want to test it again.
But why didn't the Crown Office want to test what sounded like crucial evidence? And why did the Scottish authorities ignore calls from one of the most powerful politicians in Sweden to look again at the circumstances surrounding Annie's death? We should say at this point, if you happened to be in Prestwick on the weekend of Saturday, December the 4th, 2005, if you saw something unusual on the beach that day, something that appeared odd or out of place, then please email us, storycast@skynews.co.uk.